the game Dead Cells, a lot of stuff comes to mind. A tight visual aesthetic, a bunch of hapless Dark Souls comparisons, that time I got a massive welt on my back because I tried to dodge roll off my back patio. But more than any of that, the mischievous ideological imp stomping around my skull the hardest is a musical term called reharmonization, which is the process of taking an existing melody and writing a new set of chords to go with it. It's a really effective melodic technique that can allow for more dynamic songwriting, whether you're doing a cover or just working off of an established motif. But since language is fluid and words can mean anything if you put them in the right order, there's no reason this postulation must be exclusively musical. The same abstraction can be summoned for entire genres to combine familiar ideas to create innovative, memorable experiences. This is something that I, a word genius and benevolent god of art categorization, like to call genre reharmonization, or taking an existing structure and establishing a relationship to a different existing structure similar to melody and harmony. Cadence of Hyrule is a terrific example of this concept within the roguelike genre, and its soundtrack is literally just a bunch of musical reharmonizations as it is. But Cadence of Hyrule's roguelike elements are restricted to dungeons and the overworld map layout, so it's not exactly the purest strain of this idea. Dead Cells, on the other hand, is the paragon of video games evoking this thing I just made up, and expertly epitomizes why this type of design challenges our perception of genre limitations and pushes the boundaries of the medium. If that thesis didn't make a ton of sense, it's probably because you're not a 200 IQ gamer and don't have the shirt to match like me, but don't you worry. I'm about to explain all of this in detail because that is how essays work. So, let's go all in on Dead Cells, shall we? Segue, please. Too fast, too soon. The brilliance of Dead Cells and its induction of genre reharmonization is how the genres it reharmonizes, namely roguelike and Metroidvania, not only both exemplify how truly awful gamers are at naming things, but evoke formulas that are in many ways directly at odds with one another. On the roguelike side, Dead Cells utilizes permanent death of the player character and procedural generation for its level layouts and stage order, meaning that a game over necessarily entails the loss of all acquired items and an entirely new layout awaiting the player each and every time they restart. Metroidvania games, on the other hand, prototypically plan for players to memorize each discrete section of its large interconnected map, and demand the discovery of specific items hidden within those maps for progression. So how do they make this all work? Well, developer Motion Twin cleverly conceded to challenge and expand how the rigidity of Metroidvania conventions can be applied to such a chaotic gameplay loop, by adding newly discovered weapons and items to the ever-expanding lottery of potential payouts, and giving the player certain permanent upgrades that are redeemable between levels. This not only provides a tangible sense of progression in the midst of merciless permadeath passages, but simultaneously encourages participants to try out different playstyles and fully explore their surroundings for further rewards. This is kind of like that time U2 featured on a Kendrick Lamar song. On paper, nobody should have had any faith in that idea working out at all. But the fact that it not only didn't feel like you were getting mugged by a Coachella poster, but was actually great, was nothing short of miraculous. Another example of how these superficially incompatible ideas hone the harmony of difference is in the trade-off between roguelike and, yes, admittedly Souls-like, emergent gameplay systems that necessitate the need to approach enemies with every available weapon pull, and the prevailing proclivity of Metroidvanias to design specific weapons around specific enemies. Instead of seeking a mere middle ground between the two by, tailoring specific permanent upgrades to certain types of enemies, weapons are instead curated to work in conjunction with one another, such as one weapon poisoning enemies and another dealing double damage to enemies who have just been poisoned. This gives the player's potential arsenal a perception of purpose, without forsaking the chaotic circumstances created by the game's procedural nature. It's such a smart system, and I really don't know of any other game that operates in precisely this way. It makes Dead Cells all the more difficult to categorize neatly, and that's a very, very good thing, because in my informed opinion as a benevolent god of art categorization, our collective obsession with art categorization does far more harm than good and absolutely needs to be challenged. Whether it's the feral fixation on genre purism, the discordant discourse surrounding which Metacritic scores make a game objectively good or bad, or the pervasive and remarkably false idea that there is any such thing as objective criticism in the first place, the gaming community has a penchant for self-cannibalization at the expense of the art we claim to be defending. Nobody makes a piece of art so it can be be put on a list and ranked against other pieces of art by shoddy metrics that fancy themselves empirical. And in my view, Dead Cells is an act of rebellion in the face of these toxic tendencies. Instead of being content to stay in one lane or even blur the lines between those lanes, Motion Twin made a game that aims to, and succeeds at, getting rid of those lines altogether. Sure, some degree of classification is and always will be necessary for a basic semblance of structure, but in the same way that Dead Cells reharmonizes the chaos of a roguelike with the broad rigidity of a Metroidvania, it forces us to reconsider how we view genre and recontextualizes the language we use to describe it. And if the industry, arguably inching closer and closer to full-fledged homogeneity, is in desperate need of anything right now, it's more subversive, challenging art like this. So that's Dead Cells in a nutshell. It's a cool game made by smart people, and if you appreciate the amount of effort and attention to detail poured into the game, you'll probably also appreciate how buck wild this new Prisoners Edition is. Not only do you get a physical copy of the game and download code for the Bad Seed DLC, 3 pins, 4 stickers, an art book, an art card, a keychain, and a numbered certificate card, you also get an 8.5-inch prisoner figure and 2 tracks from the game's official soundtrack pressed on vibrant orange 7-inch vinyl, all served to you in a sleek metal tin. This thing is so fresh that it causes me... The Dead Cells Prisoners Edition is just as fire as it is limited to 10,000 copies. So if you're as into this sort of thing as I am, make sure you snag this from your local GameStop store or GameStop.com before it's gone for good, because it will not respawn at the prisoners' quarters. A little gamer humor for you. And if you're interested in hearing more media criticism and music and maligned memes from me, you can find me at youtube.com/Nugatory videos. Until next time, I'm gonna try that patio dodge roll one more time, because statistically speaking, there are only so many times I can hurt myself before I actually get it. And given my high IQ, I can calculate altitudes. I know a lot about the wind. You do the thing where you lick your index finger and you know what the wind conditions are. It's very technical.